This is Chapter 11 of Phoenix Incandescent, The Girl Who Was Not a Pawn. So, mystery girl, what can you do? Charlotte stared her reflection down, daring it to look away first. Her now brown eyes, flecked with gold, stared right back, accepting the challenge. She ran her fingers through her wet hair, fingering the groups of white strands throughout. She frowned. Where had the red hair come from? She had gone from not looking much like her parents to not looking much like her parents in a different way. Something still didn't add up. She pulled her gloves on with a snap and turned to each side in the mirror. Behind her, Bo snored softly. He looked odd, wrapped in a blanket. Surely wings weren't meant to be covered, for the blanket changed the majesty of the feathers into two lumps hidden under cloth. She turned her head back to stare again in the mirror. It felt odd to go from a huge closet full of clothes to 3 outfits. How long would she have to wear these anyway? She frowned and ran her hands down the silky yet strong material. It clung to her like a second skin and shimmered a soft gray and blue like the sky before rain. Charlotte sat down on the floor across from the bed next to her father's backpack. She ran her hand across the worn fabric and danced her fingers across the stitching on the main flap. She pulled out the books her father had packed for her. Some books she recognized. The Big Book of Magani, The Weavers and the History They Wove, Danes and the Mundane, The Immigration of Magic, A Rare Look at Rare Magani, and a fairy tale, The Seclusion of Fairies After the Great Immigration. She also found the list of books Lodestar had asked for beneath the other ones. It was nothing short of depressing. A history of evil, the shadow that always lurks, to hunt or be hunted, battle strategies of long ago, dangerous Magani, unraveling the dark with the light, and the responsibility to defend. Charlotte stacked the books beside the bed. Right now she wanted to check on the castle and the grounds, but tonight she would start reading the books. She knelt beside Bo, laid her head on the end of the bed next to his, and listened to his breathing. She inched her fingers toward him, but stopped before she reached his warm skin. What terrible timing was this? In the fairy tales, once the man professed his love, he and his lady rode off together on a horse and lived happily ever after. In her story, the man professed his love right before she blew up, scarred him, and remained unable to touch him without a barrier. But then her tale was different from the start. She was coming from a happy beginning. She glanced over at the books warily. Was she merely at the beginning of her story? What turmoil would the middle pages hold? Would the tale finish with a happy ending? She hurried out of the room and down to the kitchen to settle her worries away with a cup of tea. Wilhelm was busy with both repairs and improvements upon the castle. They spent the morning together, Charlotte keeping a safe distance away from him, walking the grounds and every floor of the castle. He was kind and calm and studious. He asked questions quietly, his gentle eyes locked with hers constantly. Did she want to add on to the castle? Did she want the repairs to be shown or hidden? Would she restart her mother's business? Would another weaver use her father's classroom for teaching? Did she want to rebuild the garage? Did she want to add other buildings to the property? Some of the questions she anticipated with thumping heart. Others surprised her. Wilhelm waited patiently for her responses and nodded encouragingly from time to time. Some of the decisions would wait for another meeting. A pot of potato soup simmered, filling the room with fragrant warmth when she stopped by the kitchen in the afternoon to eat and visit with the Hobbs. They were sullen today, something she couldn't remember them ever being. Isaac's absence was heavy on their hearts. Basil and Joseph had known him since his birth, and the rest of the Hobbs had grown up with his kind presence. Charlotte sat on a windowsill and listened to their stories, for it was her responsibility to care for them now. While other Weaver families had varying levels of involvement with their Hobbs, Isaac had always held an unusually high level of fondness for his. The absence of her parents weighed heavily on Charlotte as well. She had planned to be the one who left, not the other way around. Now that she was experiencing their unexpected loss, she regretted her previous plans. A little. She spent the next week resting, reading everything she could get her hands on that she felt might be valuable, and asking questions of anybody she felt might have answers she needed. She was exhausted most of the time at first, so she kept to her room a lot. Chime and Bliss came and went. Basil brought food to her room when she didn't want to leave. Bo tried to gauge her temperature, but she shooed him away each time. She felt guilty, but she didn't want to hurt somebody she loved. He knew how she felt. They both kept busy, and neither of them divulged the other what they were doing. Finally, Charlotte had had enough of the room. She no longer had times where she felt overwhelmingly weak, and her eyes hurt from all the reading. She headed down to the kitchen very early in the morning to find Joseph and Basil sitting at the table alone. "Are you rested, then?" Basil asked. Charlotte winced when he started toward her, but pulled back. "More than rested now," she confirmed. "I'm not sure if I can be touched yet, or if I ever will be able to be." Joseph shook his head sadly. "We have been worried about you. Bo says you won't let him near." Charlotte sat down at the table. She tucked her hands into her lap and offered a smile. "I really needed the space this week. Has the news said anything at all about our situation?" No, it has not, Joseph said with disdain. Has anyone heard anything from my parents? No, said Zarok from the door. He entered, followed by Lodestar, nor do we expect it. They are likely cut off from all communication for a short while. Charlotte looked around the room. Her heartbeat thumped wildly, and she sucked in a shaky breath of air. What are we going to do about this menace? Joseph looked angrily out the window. What do you mean? Do you think that we're going to be able to just walk into a battle with those who have attacked us twice now? The Megard is working on the situation. Right now we need to rebuild our future. Charlotte wanted to reach out to Joseph. She longed to kiss his head, but instead she waited until he turned to face her. How exactly are we supposed to have a future with those crazy nuts out there? He turned away from her and stared back at the window again. Zarok nodded at her. If you are eager to learn, then we will train you to start fighting tomorrow morning at first light. If you wish to make this a battle in your life, then the best thing we can do is prepare you for it. Zarok turned to Joseph. Sharpen your sword, man. You shall be one of her teachers. Joseph? Charlotte asked. She laughed. A hint of grin crossed Zarok's lips. Don't let his height fool you. I've seen him take down a giant. Charlotte raised her eyebrows at Joseph, who was studying her now with a blank look. Someday I want to hear those stories about my father and his crew of adventurers, she said, and reached her hand out to him, leaving her fingertips a few inches away from his hand. Basil grunted and stirred his tea. Your father swore us to secrecy. How far does that secrecy extend? Charlotte asked quietly. She dropped her eyes at the table and traced the scratches in the wood with her fingernail. It stands for now, Joseph answered gently. He inched his fingers toward her until they almost touched before pulling his hand away. Now, you'll want to see Wilder. He and Wynne have returned, but they cannot stay long. The Megard has passed strict guidelines for traveling. They will be searching the country and visiting all Megani homelands for inspection. Bliss and Bo will most likely be sent home, too. Charlotte stood immediately. That's insane! Oh, no, no. Here she was finally ready to be with him, and he was leaving. What had she been thinking this week? It's wise, Basil countered. He waved a spoon at her. Enough of the talk for now. Go see Bo. Charlotte ran to Bo's temporary room in the Hobbs wing. Wynne and Wilder sat on the bed, talking quietly with Bliss. Charlotte grabbed the doorframe to stop or run, and clung to it to keep herself from embracing them. I just heard. Charlotte blinked back her tears. This is your home, too. Do you really have to leave? Wynne smiled over at her. Charlotte, this will always be our home away from home, but we do have certain responsibilities we must take care of. I don't understand what's going on, she said. Wilder stood across the room. He leaned against the wall beside her. If we all go home, then it will make it easier for the Megard to watch and protect us all. It also makes it easier for them to trace the remaining magic across the lands and hopefully quickly capture whoever is behind all this. Where is Bo? She asked quietly. Is he already packed? Bliss rolled her eyes. He insists that he will stay with you. Wilder winked at Charlotte. Bo and Charlotte have their own life to live. Right now they are where they need to be. I wish I could hug you all goodbye. Charlotte formed her hands into fists at her sides. We do too, Wynne replied. You must feel as if we're abandoning you. The Hobbs will take care of you, and we will be checking in as often as we can. Maybe you will be able to visit us soon, Bliss said. Wilder nodded. We don't want to leave you, but we have a responsibility to protect our people. The Bronze Eagles used to be great warriors a long time ago. It's time we train for those days again. He handed her a set of moonstone discs. Barnabas wanted you to have these. Charlotte smiled to herself and slipped the discs in her bag. Barnabas, who wasn't big on technology, was sharing magical technology with her. He was also keeping her informed of everything going on in the Megani world. She would have to find a way to thank him. She patted the bag in appreciation and looked back up at Wilder. Are you leaving right now? As soon as we say goodbye to Bo, Bliss answered. He's waiting outside. Will you see us out? Wynne asked. Of course. Charlotte followed them to the back lawns, where Bo stood gazing at the sky. Hey, stranger, he greeted Charlotte with a half-grin. I'll get to you in a bit, though. He broke away to give his goodbyes of hugs and quiet words to his parents and sister. Till we meet again, Bo yelled as they flew away. They responded with the same. Charlotte watched as his family flew away. She reached for Bo's hand, then clenched her hand and stepped back. He turned to Charlotte. The wind whipped in his hair into a disarray, and goosebumps covered his flesh. Would you care for a stroll? She nodded. We haven't talked much this week. You haven't talked much this week, he corrected. She walked by his side silently then. They zigzagged through the orchard. It was true that Bo had talked to her plenty off and on through the week. Everyone had, but she had kept her distance from them all. I'm not trying to shame you, he pulled her into a hug. You've been through a lot and needed to sleep and time to process what happened. Are you better? Charlotte tried to step back, but he grabbed her bare hand and pulled her closer. She looked at him with wide eyes. Bo, am I burning you? No, he shrugged. You are still a little hot, but it's not as noticeable. He gently placed his hands on her face and rested his forehead on her forehead. She closed her eyes and breathed in and out as slowly as she could, lest her emotions get the best of her. Still, she shivered at each touch of his hands. He let his hands fall to her shoulders, down her arms, and they were holding hands again. We are touching. Yes. I'm not burning you. No. She opened her eyes and grabbed his arms. He didn't flinch, and she didn't see any burn marks where they had touched when she lifted her fingers away. But she could see the tiny white flame scars on his arms from her transformation. Don't focus on those, Bo warned her. It's hard not to when I can see them. I wish I could erase them. She slowly ran her hands over his arms. When I saw your family packing, I thought you were leaving. I thought maybe you wanted to leave. I thought you might be relieved to have an excuse to leave. Bo raised his eyebrows and shook his head at her. She looked into his eyes. But you didn't leave me. She reached up to kiss him. It was a slow kiss, a kiss that melted into more. Of course, I didn't leave you, he said when they finished. We are in this together. He played with the hair that had come loose from her braid. I'm sorry about everything you've lost, Charlotte. I know you must feel as if your whole world has been shattered. Thank you, she said quietly, before running her fingers over his arms again. I'm sorry I burned you. He pulled her into a hug and rested his head on her head. I would do it all over again. I didn't even really feel anything. I was worried about you. Bo, she pulled away from him. I don't want you to worry about me. I don't want to worry about me. He smirked and grabbed her hands. What are you talking about, Lottie? I want to train with Zarok, she insisted, and I want to know what you think of it, even if it doesn't matter what you think. Bo laughed. You think things are going to change that much between us? He lifted her chin and kissed her lips. You know how we work. It's what I love about us. He tucked her into his side and headed away. May I ask you why you want to train a fight? He asked. I think you know that answer already, she replied. I'm willing to bet it's the same as yours. Bo looked unflinchingly back into her eyes and smiled. You don't want to hide anymore, right? No, Charlotte nudged him in the ribs. I'm training in case I need to save your hide someday. I assumed you were training to save your own. Bo laughed, and you think I would leave you. There's something serious I need to do someday. Get married to me? Bo winked. Charlotte slipped her arm around his waist. I want to find out who did this. I want to help stop what's going on. She held her breath and searched his face for emotion. Would he think she was crazy? Would he go along? Would he try to persuade her to leave such ideas alone? Bo merely smiled in a serious way. I would expect nothing less from you. Partners, she asked. Partners, he replied. They walked back to the kitchen. Sebastian waved them over. I want to see your arms again, Bo. He patted the stool next to him. Run everything that happened when she changed by me one more time. Every detail you can remember, no matter how insignificant you think it was. I want it down on paper this time. The situation is curious, Sebastian stated once Bo was finished. Lodestar shrugged. It's unique and new, yes, but it fits together nicely. He held her during the transformation. The fairy clothes protected him enough to be around the energy surging through her skin and body. Look at her eyes and the streaks in her hair, Basil pointed out. She even looks a little like a bronze eagle now. I wonder. Lodestar crossed her arms in front of her chest and narrowed her eyes. A power transfer. Did the fairies instruct you to both wear the clothing? Sebastian asked. Of course they did, Lodestar said. The fairies must have had suspicions of what might happen. I say they know much more than they let on. I say they may be using her as a battle pawn, Zarok said as he placed his cup down on the table hard. I bet they know who's behind all of this. He and Lodestar exchanged many different looks across the table. Basil and Joseph sat silently, and Basil stirred his cup absent-mindedly while Joseph stared out the window. I will not be a pawn. Charlotte sat back in her chair and crossed one leg over the other. Zarok, tomorrow morning I train. By doing so, you may be following the direction they want you to take, Joseph advised. It's different, Charlotte insisted. It's different because I choose this. Tonight I will take a look at the discs that Barnabas left and we form our own plan. But the Magard has a plan, Basil argued. There's a reason Barnabas left the discs. I think he wants us to look into it on our own. There's something I haven't mentioned, Sebastian, Bo said. Others can touch her through fabric, but I can touch Charlotte skin to skin without being burned now. A side effect of being with her during the transformation? Joseph asked. Perhaps, Lodestar said. She looked back and forth between Bo and Charlotte. There's much for us to learn. How long do you think the heat will last? Charlotte asked. She lay her hands palm up on the table. I wish I could give you an answer to that, Lodestar stared solemnly at Charlotte. You may be the only one who can find the answers you seek. And that's chapter 11. Next time, chapter 12.